Everyone should know how to read labels, at least that's what the experts say. However, with the continual introduction of new terms and companies' focused efforts to entice you to always buy more, label reading could be your biggest crutch and leave you no healthier than if you didn't read the labels. Let me show you 5 clear reasons to stop reading labels. When did making food choices become so difficult? The real question is, does it have to be? Our ancestors seemed to maximize their years without reading food labels. But let me be clear, I'm not against food labels. I'm against the intentional use of labels to manipulate you into buying decisions and you as the consumer placing your faith in those labels. So with that said, let's go over 5 reasons to stop reading labels that will inherently direct you towards better food choices. For those of you that are watching this video to learn more about label lust, don't worry, I'm going to get there. But a few points first. I want to start out by saying that as I'm talking about food labels, I'm not necessarily talking about the nutrition facts or the ingredients portion of a label, although games can be played with those as well. What I'm really focusing on with this video are the labels that you see on the front of packages, on the front of foods that are meant to immediately grab your attention before you ever get to the nutrition facts or the ingredients section. So the first one that I'm going to introduce to you here as a clear reason to stop reading labels is that labels can be a source of health misinformation. Many food labels are designed to make a product look better than it actually is. When you see terms like low fat, sugar-free, natural, those can be misleading and give you a false sense of security about the food's actual nutritional value. It's enticing you that the main focus of that food is what's on the front of the label. But there may be aspects of that food that are not in your best interest that if you don't read that, if you don't flip that product over and actually read the ingredients or the nutrition facts, you may not recognize that. And you may again have put a false sense of security into that product. By focusing too much on the label, it's very likely that you could overlook the actual ingredients that may be harmful or unnecessary to your health. This also has a tendency to make you think that when you see those labels initially, those terms, those buzz terms, if you will, on the front of a package, that product, consuming that product is in your best interest and whoever developed that product had your best interest in mind. Keep in mind, you're buying a commodity when you're buying these products. And they're meant to sell. What's important for the companies that are producing these products are their bottom line. I hate to tell you, it's not really about your health. So just keep that in mind and have a realistic expectation. Don't give up control as the consumer. Now, the second reason that you would want to consider foregoing reading labels is that, frankly, they can be an added source of stress and confusion. When you're reading food labels, as you're looking through a lot of labels to try to figure out which one is going to be the best choice for you, it can frankly lead to decision fatigue. And a lot of these labels, the more of these you start to read, you start to miss the finer details of what makes them different and everything starts to run together. So again, decision fatigue. Which one do I take home? Which one do I leave in the store? With so many conflicting health claims out there and confusion about nutritional information, there always seems to be 2 sides on these debates. It just seems to be endless. You look at these packages and these labels, and there seems to be a lot of small print. And I will add in here, because many of you might be thinking, as I'm talking about these labels, that I'm only talking about a prepackaged food. I'm not. I would actually tell you to go pick up a package of meat, even a product that is labeled organic meat, and look at how much small print is on that. And you'll be surprised if you just take the time to read through that small print, some of the details that you might find out about that product that you're potentially buying. So all of these things, when you factor them all together, the small print, the confusing aspects of the nutritional information, these conflicting health claims, All of this can just make it start to seem overwhelming of how to make sense of all of this. And the more of this that you try to deal with and take in, this stress might lead to you ultimately making some unhealthy choices rather than you taking a mindful approach to eating. For example, when you go in and you start to make purchases, before you make that purchase and just do it as a reactionary purchase, take the time to ask yourself, why am I purchasing this? What is this doing for me? And if you're looking at those products and getting pulled into those food labels, you're probably giving up that mindfulness that otherwise should be an inherent part of your food selection process. The third reason to consider no longer reading food labels is that food labels often prioritize packaged food or processed food, which frankly are just not as beneficial as whole food unprocessed options are. Even when you look at a product that may seem that it's still a healthy option, if you compared it to its whole food option, there's still going to be an added value of that whole food option over that processed or packaged option. So when you're constantly reading labels, you may unintentionally ignore other food choices in your diet, like fresh fruits and vegetables, quality meats, other foods that are just inherently more nutrient dense. And frankly, and this is probably the more important part, they're inherently label-free options that are just far healthier. Now, if you're already telling yourself that you're done with food labels or you want to try a different option, well, visit Harvest Hills Ranch and see what food transparency really looks like. The link's down in the description. On to our fourth reason to give up your reading of food labels, or at a minimum, stop putting so much attention on them. And that is that they can create a false sense of control. When you're relying too much on food labels to make a health decision, it can create that false sense of control over your diet. Meaning that as long as I look at these labels and I choose the better term, that's going to be optimal for me. And many times what that ultimately does is that it decreases the quality and nutritional value of the meals that you're consuming. And so you may find that you're no longer focusing on how and where food is sourced. You're not as interested in the transparency because you're looking at that label and thinking that label is transparent when in reality it's not. And the things that are actually more important to the food, you may not be giving those the attention that they really need. And you may even find that you start obsessing over things like calories and fat content and things like that yes, they matter at some point, but they are secondary to the quality of the food and the inherent nutritional value of that food. So a false sense of control is something nobody wants to acknowledge or admit, but it's very possible that could be you if you're constantly reading these food labels and think that is the way that you're going to make the best decision for your health or your food choices. Now, I promised you I would get to label lust, and here we are. Label lust is the fifth reason that you want to stop reading food labels. And here's what I mean by label lust. And give me a minute to explain this to you because you're going to see why I term it this way. If you get excited by buzz terms, and these are even terms not like the ones that I mentioned earlier, like low fat or sugar free or natural, but if you get really excited when you see terms like organic and sustainable and pasture raised and regenerative, and by the way, as it relates to that term regenerative, if you want to see how that term is being used to greenwash you, or if you're just not even familiar with what greenwashing is, here's a card that'll help you understand. Click on that video and learn about that. But finish this label lust conversation first. So if you get overly excited when you see those terms, you're starting to develop label lust. And many times what begins to happen here is that you're reading things into labels that is not there. For example, if you look at the term organic and you think that organic is translating to pasture raised, Those two are not the same thing. If you have the same image of both of those things in your head as aligning with each other, it's a mistake. It's not the same thing. So don't conflate one to mean the other. If those buzzwords that I mentioned earlier, now think about this and think about your inherent response. If those buzzwords literally stimulate a dopamine response for you or some type of pleasure response, you have label lust. And if you think that the more terms you see on that label, if that gives you even more satisfaction, you see vegetarian fed and pasture raised and no antibiotics ever. The more of those that get checked off for you, if you get more and more excited about that, and you're giddy when you leave with your purchase that you made the best choice, you have label lust and you have a preconceived view of what those labels actually mean. And many times what accompanies this is that there's no personal research to actually validate what those terms mean on that specific label for that specific product. And keep in mind that many of these terms that are used intentionally lack standardization of definition. Their use does not align with your preconception. So give yourself an honest review and ask yourself, Am I guilty of label lust? And if you are, and you're ready to overcome label lust and let go of reading food labels, if that's where you're at, then let me show you how one of America's biggest retailers wishes that you would have never seen this video. Click on the video on the screen to learn about their tactics. This knowledge will help you get rid of your label lust and the dependency on reading labels.